My name's Dawn Haig. I'm a member of the PIP team, and I'm very happy to be hosting the fourth Feeding Breeders webinar today. We're actually halfway through our 8-week webinar series, which is amazing. Things are going really fast. Before we start, I would like to introduce our moderator for today. I'm sure she's someone that many of you are very familiar with, Brenda Reimer. She is PIP's Tech Transfer Coordinator. Hello, Brenda.
Hi, everybody.
If you're joining our webinar series for the first time, I'll just give you a little reminder of how to get around in the FeedLoop platform. This virtual site allows you to navigate to each webinar, to visit our sponsors, network with other attendees, and most importantly, to participate in our discussion boards. You'll see all these categories on the left of your screen on the menu bar, and you just click on whichever one you like, and you can do network and move around. And if you have any questions or problems, under the networking tab, you see +1 event assistant. Put your question there, and we're happy and ready to help you. Before introducing today's speakers, I would like to thank our sponsors. Their generous funding is what makes this event possible. Presenting sponsors are the Poultry Innovation Partnership and ARDAR. Platinum level sponsors, Aviagen and EW Nutrition. Gold level sponsors, Merck Animal Health and Boehringer Ingelheim. Silver level sponsor, Cargill and Cobb. Bronze level sponsor, New Life Mills, Country Junction Feeds, Canadian Hatching Egg Producers. Student sponsor, Adesio. And finally, our supporter level and meal sponsors, Chore Time, Canadian Biosystems Incorporated, Alberta Hatching Egg Producers, Richie Smith Feeds, and Alberta Chicken Producers. Thank you so much to all of you. So the format for today's webinar will be a little different than previously. Our first speaker will be recorded. So he will do his recorded presentation, and then immediately it will be followed by our next 2 speakers. We have 3 speakers today, and then we will have our Q&A at the end of all 3 presentations. Please remember to pop your questions into the Q&A tab and not the chat. They tend to get lost in the chat, and the Q&A keeps them separate and much easier for a moderator. We don't want to miss anybody. Now, our topic today is sustainability, and our speakers will discuss different aspects of this really important and current topic, such as environmental sustainability, as well as sustainability of the industry with efficiency and management considerations. I think you're going to find it very interesting to listen to these 3 perspectives. So the question for today is, how do global feeding practices affect the sustainability of the industry? Before I introduce the speakers, I'd like to remind you, you can visit the speaker tab in the FeedLoop menu and read in detail all about their backgrounds and their accomplishments. So again, we have 3 speakers today. They are Dr. Rick Van Niemes, nutrition researcher from the Netherlands, Jorge Amado, Head of Technical Services at Aviagen Central America, and Jeff Nottenbaumer, a Canadian broiler breeder producer. So our first speaker today will be Dr. Rick Van Niemes. Welcome, Rick.
Hi, everybody. I'm Rick Van Niemes. I'm from the Netherlands, from the Wageningen University and Research. And today I talk about the challenges in broiler breeder management, and then from a Northwest Europe perspective. That's what I want to talk to you today. Okay, if you look to sustainability, you have a broad sustainability. Everybody knows this picture. You have people, planet, and prosperity or profit. But in Northwest Europe, actually, there's that distribution over the 3 different topics. Different, you can say. It's more focusing on people, of more precise welfare. And today, particularly about poultry welfare, broiler breeder welfare. So there are, in my country, Northwest Europe as well, there are some really welfare management challenges. You have feed restriction issue, the water restriction, mating behavior, mutilations, and feather cover. First, we go to feed restriction. Solutions in feed restriction, that welfare issue, definitely not feeding programs. But in the past, the last 2 decades, a lot of research is focusing on different topics like diluted diets, total diluted diets, or only protein, what I did in my work, higher body weight profiles at 20 weeks of age, onset of labor. Floor feeding can be an issue of a solution. Unrestricted access to water, I think it's important. I'll come later to that. Twice a day feeding, and yeah, I think a combination of that can help. First, floor feeding, also known by the equipment like a spay feeder. It's really a fast feeding method and a very good distribution of the feed over all the flocks. In the past, we said feed distribution within 3 minutes. Definitely now the rule of thumb is within 3 seconds with the modern broiler breeders. There are some pros, of course. When it's well management, it's really showed a better body weight uniformity, what is often seen in practice, but also found by Zutter in 2015. You see improved leg health and litter condition. Of course, litters on the floor, so these birds are focused on the floor, do a lot of scratching behavior, so that definitely help to improve the leg health and also litter condition. There are also some signs that immunity system can be improved. This is research done in Georgia by Montiel in 2016 published. And of course, scratching and searching, foraging behavior is really close to natural behavior, what is really an advantage. If you look to the cons, if the pellet quality is not that good, you definitely have a higher feed conversion ratio. If you have too much fine particles in your feed, then definitely you lose feed. And of course, there is a challenge in transition between your rear to the layer house because they're used to feed themselves from the litter. Then they must change to a feeder trough of feeder pens. Totally in the opposite of feeding programs. We run an experiment with twice a day feeding during rear, and it was very interesting. We use rough 308 pellets in 24 pens. The rough 308 is the most common breed in the Netherlands and Europe, so therefore we used that. It was this experiment we ran between 3 and 23 weeks of age, and I only show here the body weight uniformity data, and you see there is an interesting low coefficient of variation, so a better body weight uniformity at 10 weeks of age. That was really interesting and also surprising, because in advance, everybody for twice a day feeding, definitely you will have a worse body weight uniformity. But I think this has something to do with especially physical issues of the crop, the size of the crop, for example. When at younger age, and you are not really into that severe feed restriction, the amount of feed is quite high. So smaller birds have definitely not the possibility to eat all that feed, their portions in once, you know. And when you feed them twice a day, definitely they have the more possibilities to do that and really get the portion what you need for a normal body weight development. But the issue, of course, is how to apply this in practice. You know, at the moment, it's sometimes already hard to distribute the feed in a certain time over the whole house and all these birds in that house. So, and what I said, feeding within 3 seconds, definitely this is definitely the key in this feeding program twice a day. You need them to feed them as quick as possible over and to distribute that feed over the whole flock. So the spin feeds can help, or maybe we must find a novel feeding system. What I said, water restriction is also becoming more and more an issue in the Netherlands as well. So very few, is only one research done on this by Hocking et al. In the 90s, but it's becoming more and more important. What is standard practice now? During rear, the birds is 2 to 3 hours access to water, and during the laying period, 6 to 7. And sometimes they give them an extra hour in the afternoon, particularly when the temperature is somewhat higher. But don't forget, overdrinkers are not born in that way, but raised. And I think that's the key if you look to water restriction or unrestricted water access. So definitely in the future, we will go to an unrestricted access to water during the lighting period. So we need other water system. Definitely we must get rid of these bell drinkers. We still have a lot of them in the Netherlands, but in the future we definitely need nipple drinkers with a low flow nipple drinkers actually. You can think in the morning period of water of 4 hours, for example, and in the afternoon for 2 hours during rear, for example. So that can be an in-between solution. But what I hope that it works in that way, that when you give them unrestricted water, that the birds are less eager to the water, so also less stress, experience less stress. They have that already, that stress from that feed restriction. So if we can get rid of that stress due to water restriction, definitely that will help these birds, particularly for health, general health, gut health, and at the end of the day also production and reproduction. We're working on research at the moment. We definitely want to start in the rearing pyramid again. Drinkers are not born in that way, but are raised in that way. So if they are used to a longer period of water, that I think, and we experience that a little bit in our experiments, that they are not that eager to the water, and that can help them. So we think about rearing experiments with different treatments like this, restricted water compared to the totally unrestricted during rear, and then in between with 2 periods of water. And the third issue, welfare issue, is really the mating behavior. This is, if you look to broiler breeders, overmating is really the issue. In the past we have done quite a lot of research on this. We saw 90% forced mating and 40% successful mating, and therefore 40% successful matings. And this was between 20 and 30 weeks of age. And definitely all that overmating will affect the females, that they avoid. Over time, they probably avoid contact with the males. That's the idea. So at the moment, in practice, we start roughly with 9%, around 9% males at 20 weeks of age, and we use spiking males at 40 weeks of age. So, but overall, due to culling and crading, you have a decrease in male percentage. But thereby, besides that overall decrease in the male percentage, you see also a decreasing biological and physiological status of the males. Mating activity, and you see here this graph from COP, it decreased over time when people and birds become less active. The successful matings, or complete matings, decreased over time, but besides that, also sperm quality, volume, and activity decreased as well. So what you see, what we do in practice, and here you see the trend line, the global, the trend line, what is normally used in practice. You start with a certain percentage of males here, 9, 10%, it doesn't matter. You have crading, you have culling, so that decreased till around 40, 45 weeks of age, and then you do some spiking, what's quite normal in North Asia and Netherlands, and afterwards, due to crading and culling, the percentage of males decreased as well. And I already showed this graph in 2007 to farmers, to a meeting with farmers, and I said we must do totally the opposite. We must start with a much lower percentage of male and increase that over time. I know it's not that easy and directly applicable, but there are possibilities. Here I show you this slide. Recently we ran an experiment last year in breeder cages. We start with 4% males and decrease that over time till 7%. We compare that to standard cages with male percentage between 7 and 75%. Very interestingly, we found that fertility to 44 weeks of age was similar, the real fertility, and higher from 49 weeks of age. And it was really an interesting insight and observation. And of course, we also saw some improved mating behavior and better feather curve. At this time when we speak now, because this is in breeder cages, not comparable with traditional breeder houses with central slat floor, and on top of that with a laying nest, community nest. We start an experiment in on a farm with 8,000 birds, and we start with 5% and put 3% in a bench in a separate male house. And at 30 weeks of age, we bring 1.5% males from that bench, from that separated male house, to the flock. Until now, with preliminary results, but in the beginning, I saw so good mating behavior, voluntary mating behavior. I never seen that in that number in my whole career. Okay, that disappeared a bit, but still at this time, 45 weeks of age, I saw last week a difference in mating behavior, or voluntary mating behavior, or lower percentage of forced mating behavior. I saw an improved feather cover and a lower fertility. However, the fertility was somewhat lower to 30 weeks of age. But at the moment, the last hatching eggs, we saw a similar fertility, and hopefully, and that's also the idea, that at the end, fertility is higher when you start with a lower percentage of male in the beginning of the laying period. Mutilations, that's the fourth subject I want to address. This is really an issue. In the 80s, 90s, we applied 7 to 9, depends on the breed, 7 to 9 different mutilations on breeder males, from comp, beaks, toes, spur, etc. And in the females, only the beaks. So at the moment, we focus on the hind toe clipping to get rid of that, and we start with a lower male percentage. Hopefully that works. Slower increase of body weight males, but we're working on this, and this is also one of the challenges at the moment. Feather cover, that's an interesting one. Feather cover, it's so important. There are a lot of functions. It's, of course, in the first place, protection to other females, definitely. Particularly a competition around feeding, and you see that during the rearing period already, but also in the beginning of the laying period. So feed distribution, don't forget, within 3 seconds. I think it's becoming more and more important. Of course, the males has an effect as well, particularly during mating. Obstacles in the house can can cause damage, of course, but it's very important in thermoregulation. If you well know, the body temperature is around 41 degrees. It's known as script for males during mating, and it has its effect on fertility, mating behavior. So, but to be honest, breeder companies are involved in this. They definitely must do something in the selection procedure. If you just show this graph, because here you see, I must explain that. If you have an average, the green bars, an average feather cover score, or this was an all-former experiment actually, or you have an orange, what is a worse feather cover score. There was no effect on hatchability on 30 weeks, but after a while you see the difference appeared in hatchability, and here at 60 weeks of age, it's about 6-7% difference. Lower when you have a worse feather cover from the beginning on. I think that's the message. So if we look to the challenges for now and in the future in broiler breeders in Northwest Europe, feeding strategies to diminish negative effects to feed restriction, novel water management and systems are necessary for unrestricted access to water. We had to work on optimal male percentage from optimal mating behavior and production, of course. And we need adjusted management to get rid of all these mutilations. It's only the last ones, but we need some adjusted management. And feather cover, actually, we have some influence, of course, but I think this is a very important subject for the breeder companies. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Rick. He wasn't able to be with us today, so thankfully he was able to provide that recording. If you do have questions for Rick, you can certainly add them to the Q&A box. What we have been doing is taking those questions, if you have them, and presenting them back to our speakers, and then we post their questions and answers on our discussion board and peer board. So if anything spiked a thought for you and you'd like to ask a question, please feel free to put that in the Q&A box at any time. So for now, we're going to move on to our next speaker, Jorge Amado. Jorge, if you'd like to share your screen, and Jorge, if you're able to introduce Jeff when you have completed, we'll do our Q&A at the end.
Thank you, Brenda, for the invitation. I'm going straight to my presentation. Okay.
Perfect.
Okay. Thank you, Brenda, for the invitation, and thank you, Feeding Breeders webinar, for the invitation to participate today. My presentation is today about parent stock management for high performance. I like to start my presentation with this type of statement. The objective of every broiler breeder company is produce the maximum quantity of day-old chicks of the best quality with the lowest possible cost. Yes, our main driver is efficiency. That is the reason why we like to see this type of flocks. Flocks of, this is with the Ross male and Ross three-eyed female, with peaks, let me put, with peaks above 90%, between 4 to 6 weeks above 90%, and with a very long persistency above 80 and 70%. When we check the hatchability, they perform real well until the end of the production period. So producing a high amount of day-old chicks. When we move to other products, Ross male with the Ross three-eyed AP female, we see the same performance. Peaks above 90%, 3-4 weeks, with a very long persistency above 80 and 70%. And the same behavior for the hatchability. Very good fertilities, allowing us to obtain 86, 87% of hatchability in average during the whole production period. In order to achieve this performance, we paid a lot of attention to the physiological events during the rearing period, in this case for the females, where we know that we have 50% of the skeleton growth between the 4th and 5th week of age, 90% of the skeleton growth between 12 and 13 week of age. In puberty, there is an important change in weekly body weight gains, and we start to build the fat reserves, and we have to move from a V shape to a U shape in the breast condition of the females in more than 80% of the females in order to ensure a good body condition for the flock. And all those events have to happen before the first egg at 24 weeks of age. So in the rearing period, we usually say that the hatching eggs are produced in rearing and they are going to be collected in production. We follow closely the females' body weight profiles, the grading management, and the evolution of the uniformity and the CV. We provide the birds with very detailed feeding programs, especially in order to recover the light birds population. And in puberty, we have a different approach in order to ensure the body condition at 24 weeks of age. In our area, we have a very detailed management due to labor costs and the availability. At placement, we paid a lot of attention to the details. These are blackout houses, but we use this type of brooding chambers in order to ensure all the parameters are controlled, like intensity, temperature, relative humidity, a good offer of water and feed, and to obtain a very good start in both males and females. This is the growing period of the guide, and we strongly recommend to be between 5 to 6% above the target at 4 weeks of age. As soon as we are arriving to 12 weeks, 13 weeks, we suggest to be very close to the target, 1% above, 1% below. And at the end of the growing period in the late puberty, 24 weeks, we recommend to be 3 to 4% above the target. That means between 80 to 100 grams in average above the target, in order to build robust females. And we are taking body weight samples of 5% during the whole breeding period. And these body weight samples are taken early in the morning before the feeding from 1 to 24 weeks. This is a common finding at 5th week of age, when we can identify 5 different populations in body weight, in size. So we pay a lot of attention to the uniformity. We are checking the density, temperature, relative humidity, feeder space, the feed distribution, and the uniformity of that feed distribution and the speed of that feed distribution. We close monitor the feed cleanup time we are looking for 35 to 40 minutes minimum. We check the uniformity with the different feed phases and the good health, and of course, the grading management, the feeding programs, and the pen management in order to obtain the best possible uniformity. This is a common finding at 4 weeks of age. You can easily identify 5 or 6 populations in a flock. This is our usual recommendation. We suggest to do a grading, dividing the flock in 3 groups, but we usually do 5 or 6 populations in our area. We do gradings at 1st week of age, 5th week, 9 or 10 weeks, and 15 week of age. At 1st week of age, we divide the flock in 3 groups. At 5th week, we divide the flock every 40 or 60 grams. 9 weeks, every 60 or 80 grams. And at 15 week of age, we divide the flock every 80 or 100 grams. And if possible, we divide the flock in pens of 800 females to 1,500 females maximum. This is a good example. This is a body weight sample, and we are going to cut the body weight sample every 40 grams. And you can identify the 5 or 6 populations if necessary. Additionally, after the grading, we provide the birds with a specific feeding program for each population, where you can see how we are providing more feed to the light population and the lightest population of females. We add 10% more feed or 15% more feed based in the feed that we are offering to the average females. And we keep that difference for 2 weeks in order to recover body weight gains and skeleton frames. And that is the reason after 2 weeks that we do small increases in the lightest population. If we have done a good job in these 4 or 5 weeks, in the next grading, we are going to increase lower amount of feed to the light and the lightest population of females. This is what we want to do, to move all the birds, all the different populations, heavy, average, and light females, to the same body weight target at 9 weeks of age. And we do the same from 9 weeks to 15 weeks because we still have opportunity to recover the skeleton frames and to improve the body weight gains. Of course, we pay very close attention to the floor space and the feeder space according to the age of the birds in order to provide the ideal feeder space in track or pan feeders. This is the uniformity targets that we see in a practical approach, where we recommend to be in 80% uniformity at 10 weeks, 85% at 15 weeks, and 20% uniformity and 90% uniformity, sorry, at 20 weeks, with a CV of 8.76%. This is what we don't want to see: very short feeder space, very long feeder space. And this is what we see: a beautiful distribution of the birds, every bird with the ideal feeder space in pan or track feeders. Additionally, this is our feeding program from the guide, but we know that we have strong vaccine programs, but we prefer to do higher feed increases, strong feed increases between 15 to 18 weeks of age, providing increases of 8 grams, 8 grams, 8 grams for the whole flock. That means 10 grams for the light populations and maybe 5, 6 grams for the heavy populations, in order to improve the fat reserves, in order to change the body weight gains, in order to send proteins to the ovary, to the oviduct, and that is very helpful. And additionally, we suggest lower feed increases between 21 to 24 weeks of age in order to control the follicle hierarchy. That is going to be very helpful in order to reduce the number of double yolks in production period. These are our targets for the fat reserves. We suggest to be in 1% at 20 weeks, 2% at 25 weeks, 3% when we reach the peak egg mass, that is around 32 weeks, and 4% at 40 weeks. They are very important because they are going to provide us a very long persistency in production period. The main influence on the number of large follicles that are formed in the ovary is body weight. The condition of the ovary to sexual maturity lays the foundation for the future reproductive potential. Poorly formed ovaries may be a result of low body weight or photostimulus very early. This information was from Dr. Robinson and Renema from the University of Alberta. This is what we want to see at 24 weeks, a very good female in a very good condition in order to provide a very good uniformity of sexual maturity at the point of lay. This is what we see as soon as we move the females from the breeding farms. We stimulate the birth at 154 days, 22 weeks, and 10 to 15 days later, we are going to see this beautiful change in the females due to hormonal activity, estrogens, and the males, they are photostimulated 1 week before, 147 days, 21 weeks. In the production period, we are going to focus in the female body weight control with control overweights of the female. We recommend control overweights. We are going to review the feed increases and the feed withdrawal. And of course, we keep paying attention to the feed space and we close it if necessary, like you can see in this picture. We are closing the feed space due to mortality and cooling birds in order to maintain the same feed space the whole production period. This is the restriction grill that we use in order to avoid the males still feed from the females. This is our recommendation in male-female ratio. We recommend 9.5%, but now we have trials in some companies in our area with 8% to 8.5% with a very good performance. This is the way how we increase the feed in production. Every 5%, offering the full feed around 70 to 75%. That means 14 to 15 feed increases, starting with lower amount of feed, increasing more feed, but never more than 5 grams at the end, in order to provide 468 to 475 kilocalories and 24 to 25 grams of protein at the peak of production, plus the correction for operative temperature where it applies. These are the control overweights that we were talking about. We suggest that in the first third of the production period, we should be between 3 to 6% above the target. In the second third, we should be between 7 to 9% above the target. And at the end, in the last third of production, we recommend to be between 9, 10 to 12 or 13% above the target. That is very helpful in order to obtain a very long persistency and a good feather cover at the end of the production period. When we are talking about feed withdrawal, this is the guide. There are important changes and there are important approach because it's going to depend in the performance of the birds. These are the feed withdrawals of the flocks that you saw at the beginning. Our guide suggests a feed withdrawal of 7.7%, but the high performance flocks, we are removing just 2.5 to 3.5% of the feed. We follow these 3 parameters closely: the percentage of production and persistency, egg weight and evolution, the body weight evolution in the last 4 weeks, and of course, we follow the feed cleanup time, operative temperature, and the body condition of the females. Let me make some comments about the males. We recommend a very detailed body weight control and the uniformity in production. This is what we have seen very successful. We recommend to be in the body weight of the males be below the target between 23 to 33 weeks of age, and after 35 weeks of age to be as close to the target as possible, paying attention to the uniformity too. We usually recommend grading of the males in the production period is a very powerful tool in order to maintain very high levels of fertility and in production. This is a summary of our area. We have 3 different products in our area. This is data at 64 weeks of the last 2 years, where you can find that the mortality moves between 5.5 to 6%. We are above 200 eggs, total eggs, and the hatchability moves between 86% to 86.8% in average, providing us the opportunity to obtain a very good amount of chicks between 165 to 173 chicks per hen house at 64 weeks of age. Let's not forget, we must remember that we are managing something that we don't see. This is from Dr. Robinson. That is all the information I have today. If you have some questions, it will be a pleasure.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Jorge. We'll move on to Jeff for now, and then we'll come back and the end of Jeff's presentation and do a combined Q&A. I can't wait to hear the discussion between the two of you. So Jeff, it looks like you're ready to go. Take it away.
Thank you very much. So my presentation today is going to be on everyday feeding. So my name is Jeff Notenbomer. I am the owner of Willow Creek Poultry. I'm currently in Canada. So just a quick on my background. I'm a 2nd generation broiler breeder farmer in Southern Alberta, Canada. I will be speaking to you based on my experience with broiler breeders in Canada. So we have a 2-layer barn, 1 pullet barn setup, and that is very normal for Canada. I'm currently the chair of the Alberta Hatching Eggs. I'm also director of the Canadian Poultry Research Council and a former chair of the Poultry Innovation Partnership. An important point here too is this presentation will be from a production level, not from a research level. And I'll be speaking on how feed stress can hurt our birds. So why am I here with everyday feeding? It's important for me that you understand that I'm not here to tell you that I have all the answers. I'm here because I like to share data. I'm here to show you what I do and to share my data and my experience with you. I'm trying to get you to consider that everyday feeding is easily possible. Everyday feeding, in my opinion, can be accomplished one of 2 ways: through proper barn equipment or through management. I do it through management. And in fact, if you look at my barns and equipment layout, they probably don't help me with everyday feeding. So I have never skip a day fed in my life. I have been a breeder producer since 1996. And I don't really know how to skip a day feed. I sometimes wonder how people overcome the challenges of skip a day feeding, which you may think is a funny statement, but we'll get back to that later. I know there's other places in the world who do not skip a day feed, but in North America, skip a day is the most common practice. And what I do know is that skip a day feeding has the large potential to be a target for animal welfare activists. What I am presenting today is that the challenges for everyday feeding are no greater than the challenges for skip a day feeding. And I also believe that the benefits of everyday feeding very much outweigh the challenges. North American producers have said they cannot overcome the hurdles of everyday feeding. And I say that's not true. So why everyday feeding? Let's talk about stress reduction. So everything we do as breeder farmers is to reduce stress. I love to talk about stress reduction. When people ask what I do, I tell them I'm in the stress reduction business. Everything we do in the barn is to mitigate stress, light stress, feed stress, disease stress, production stress. Stress opens up the birds to challenges like coxy, feather pecking, feather coverage, fat pad development, and maintenance are the few things that come to my mind. I don't have issues with either coxy or feather pecking. Why do we want to add the stress of packing a bird full of feed and then starving it the next day? In my opinion, it's my opinion that at a nutritional level, there are no benefits to skip a day. And I'd argue that skip a day hurts the birds. And I would also argue that makes the birds inefficient. Now, primary breeders do spend a lot of time breeding the birds to be feed efficient. Why? So producers can continue to feed the birds in an inefficient way. I'd rather see more emphasis from the primary breeders put on production or health. A real quick story, in 2018, Mark was doing an education program on cocci, and since we never had cocci, we decided to join in and learn more. Based on our practices, we should have had cocci, and we never did. Why? Questions that I have, where do skip-a-day feeding, the start of skip-a-day feeding and cocci, where do those line up? I realize those are just questions, but that's what I want to put in your mind at this point. So just a quick visual. Here's today's lunch, heat up, because here's tomorrow's lunch. When you look at it, it just, it seems strange. And I want you to seriously consider the impact that skip-a-day feeding has on the stress levels of the bird on a logical level. And also consider what it's doing to the birds from a nutritional and a metabolism efficiency perspective. And the big question is, what is it doing to the fat pads? So people who come to my farm usually comment that my birds are very calm. That, you know, I would have no problem bringing everybody here. I know biosecurity and AI withstanding, if we all dressed up and we went in the barn, I'd have no problem with that because my birds are very calm. This picture, it was really cold in February, it was -30. We decided we wanted to take all the litter down, and this was at 32 weeks. It was a couple days before peak production. No mortality issues, no production issues. The birds are calm. Why? I think it has to do with skip-a-day feeding. So feed stress. Why do we skip-a-day feed? So that's the way we've always done it. There are no other ways. Skip-a-day is easier and less management needed. So I want to speak on a few things here. Everything we do in breeders is problem solving. We take an animal with the genetics to be, we take an animal with the genetics of a beef cow and ask it to be a dairy cow. It shouldn't work, but we make it work. But for some reason, skip-a-day feeding has always been the hurdle people don't think they can cross. We need to work more on cost-effective equipment that can evenly distribute feed very quick. Broiler feeding systems do not work in a breeder barn. Under management, I do believe that management in breeders is a skill. You need to be sitting on a bucket in your barn and seeing what your birds are doing. On our farm, we would never use our computer time clocks to feed our pullets. It's too valuable to be in the barn at that time. Breeders is management intensive if you want good results. Everyday feeding does take management and a different approach, but don't be scared of that. And I do know that I spend more time in my coffee room at work than I do managing my everyday feeding programs. So everyday feeding. So the benefits: stress reduction, more efficient metabolism, good uniformities, animal welfare friendly. So let's talk about animal welfare for a quick second. This is an issue we need to look at ideas and consider them before they are forced on us by society. Let's talk about fat pads. On a no feeding day, are there negative effects on the fat pads? Do the birds draw on their fat pad reserves? As a farmer, I like a nice steady increase in fat pads. And we all know that fat pads need to be built up in the birds. Let's talk about feather pecking. Is it stress induced? What causes that stress? Also with cocci, when does it start in a flock? And is skip-a-day feeding hurting the birds? I do have a picture that I got from Avagen. I asked Avagen for all of their research on everyday feeding, and this was a presentation from Nick Skolton. And the picture shows liver development at different feeding programs, 5, 2, 4, 3 skip-a-day and daily. Feed stress hurts our birds. This picture was very telling to me. As a farmer, I always thought there was consequences to skip-a-day feeding. So let's talk about uniformities. Here are the uniformities for our last completed flocks. I'm happy with our uniformities on everyday feeding. This data is from 2019, and it's very consistent to the data from our flocks from 2000 till 2019, 2020. In the last 2 years on our farm, we've been focusing in a different direction with our feeding program. We've been trying to accelerate the bird's sexual maturity by 2 weeks. In Canada, we only keep our flocks till about 59 weeks, and we are told when we ship out our flocks. So with this being the case, we're trying to get 2 more weeks production on the front side of the cycle since we can't have it on the back. So we're trying to accelerate the body weight sexual maturity by 2 weeks. So the data from the last 2 years is kind of a trial for us, and it's not quite done yet. This is the slide on average uniformities. Okay, next we're going to talk about everyday feeding, how to start. All right, so stud barns and male barns. If you want to test run everyday feeding, I would start in your male barn or in your spiking barns. Speed of the feed to all the birds, to me, is the key. Every bird needs equal access to feed at the same time. On 2 minutes till all the birds are settled in and have equal access is kind of what we're aiming for. So in this spiking barn, it's 40 by 25 with 300 males. It has 28 pans with 450 holes. So it has 450 holes for about 320 males. It's a perfect place to try everyday feeding. There's no management changes needed, just feed to body weight. In this case, feed is distributed very quickly because the lines are so short. Picture of our growing barn. So our growing barn is 190 by 70. So it's 14,000 square feet with straight line feed rows. So our growing barn, we have 9 rows of Roxel pans. There's 90 pans per row, 16 holes per pan. So that's 12,960 holes for about 10,000 birds. I'd like to have about 20% more feeder holes than hens in the barn. I think the same rules apply to everyday feeding as skip a day. You need to have your feed distributed as quick as possible. In my opinion, it takes the birds about 1.5 minutes to settle into spot to find their feed. So I feel that you need to be able to distribute all of your feed in 1 to 2 minutes. So this gives you about 3 minutes to get all your birds equal access to the feed. How you do this is different in every barn, but it does take management, or it takes equipment. An example, if I had a chain feeder, I would probably cap it. I would make a simple tin cap over the top of it, hook it to a winch system. That way your chain could run all the way through the barn and your birds wouldn't have access. You lift it off, all the birds have access. What we're currently doing is we have 2 different styles that we do in the pullet barn. So we have red lights at the back of the barn at the end of the feed lines, and they turn on about 15 minutes to 20 minutes before the feeders run in the dark. This causes the birds to migrate to the back of the barn, and the feed lines fill from front to back, and the birds fill the lines from back to front. We also use a presentation style feeding. So we lift the rows every day about 3 feet off the ground. So we lift the rows while they're empty. The hoppers fill while they're raised up. We run the feeder lines in the dark about 10 minutes before the lights turn on. We go in the barn, we lower those feeders, and all the birds get equal access at the same time. That whole process to lower the lines, the birds feed out, and we raise everything up and reset it for the day takes us under half an hour. So it's about a half an hour of work a day. We're also considering renovating that barn so that the feed distributes quicker. Feed lines of about 100 to 110 feet maximum. They charge and fill very quickly, but then you have, instead of our 9 motors and 9 feeder rows, then we would have 18 motors and 18 feeder rows. So that's the trade-off. So it takes more equipment, but I do think it would pay for itself very quickly. I have spoke to people who are trying to everyday feed by bulking up the feed. I do understand this. They are trying to take the management portion away through bulky feed, and this might also have animal welfare benefits for bird hunger, but I like to concentrate more on the management. And I also worry a bit that packing the birds full of feed is also a feed stress, but that's for the researchers to decide. I want to bring to your attention the last 2 columns for feed amounts and bird amounts. I want to show you some of the efficiencies. So this is just our normal flock sheet. This is some males. So we have total birds in the barn, and then we have average weekly weights, and then hand weights. But here we'll point out a couple things. So if we look at 5 weeks, we're feeding 53 grams to the 56, our recommended averagen curve. At 10, we were 61 to the 72. At 15, we were 75 to the recommended 88. At 20, we were 86 grams to the recommended 111 to get to our target body weights. So this graph shows the 7 flocks between 2019, 2020, and this is very normal for kind of 2000 to 2020 for us. So this shows you the amount of grams fed for the hens to reach the target body weight. So the red here is the standard. When I submitted this data to Avogen, one of the things that piqued their interest was the amount of feed that I was feeding in the growing phase. So down here we have weeks, and here are the different feed curves. This graph shows it in a different way. This is the percentage. This is the percentage of the Avogen feed curve that we're feeding to hit our target body weights. And again, the same data in a different way, percentage of feed savings to hit target body weights. Okay, so this is a little bit of data from our hens. So again, I'll bring your attention to the last 2 columns. We were feeding 36 to the recommended 39 on an everyday feeding program, 51 to 54. At 15 weeks, we were 64 to 75. I'll move on to the bottom part of this page. At 20 weeks, we were 80 grams to the suggested 101. And at 25, we were 116 to the suggested 129. We did line up more around peak, and we were able to pull the feed away quite fast at the end too. I think this has to do with fat pads and fat pad reserves. So, summary. Extra feeding space. 20% more space than birds. Equipment will pay for itself very quickly. Fast and even distribution. That's where management comes in. Everybody's systems are different. How you get that feed to the birds, so every bird gets equal access at the same time. And does that happen in your barn? You have to get in there and be in there while they're feeding to find out. You have to be watching it every day, and less feed to reach target body weight. So that is my presentation. Any questions?
Thank you, Jeff. Jorge, if you'd like to come on. I found 2 very interesting presentations from our live speakers today. Also, I don't want to forget about Rick, but since he can't be here for the questions, we were probably likely to focus on Jeff and Jorge's presentation. If you have a question, just a reminder that you can put that in the Q&A box at the bottom of the video screen. Having trouble with my words this morning. So sorry about that, everyone. I think my first question, and I think both Jeff and Jorge might have, pardon me, everyone, I'm so sorry. I think Jeff and Jorge might have different perspectives on where I'm going with this one, but it's always been interesting to me in the time that I've been in the industry that, and it's true in breeders and it's true in laying hens as well, like table leg production, that some people say you got to feed over the target and some people say you have to feed over the target. So Jorge, you showed that, your strategy was to feed over and kind of under in different spots. And Jeff, you showed how you're feeding much less. So I'm just really interested in why don't we change the target? Is the target wrong? And yeah, I'd just be interested in the perspective from both of you. So Jorge, if you want to go first.
Thank you, Brenda. I think we are trying to bring more information together in order to ensure that we are going to take the right direction. We are in Central America and Latin America using almost the same body weight profile from Mexico to Argentina, and we try to reach very high peaks of production with a very long persistency. But we pay a lot of attention to the accumulative nutrition that we have at 20 weeks. We are trying to look for 22,000 kilocalories and more or less 1,200 grams of protein at 20 weeks of age. That's why we think that is a key point in order to obtain a very good performance with a reasonable mortality and a good amount of eggs. Currently, our target is to reach 200 eggs at 64 weeks. So that is what we are doing. We have low mortalities because we are aware that the light birds, the light population, they produce less eggs, smaller eggs, and of course they don't have enough fat reserves in order to be working well until the end of the production period. That will be the main driver of us. We prefer to be slightly or above the target.
Mhm. I really appreciated it's always good to have, I mean, I talk about, the target body weight curve, but I appreciated your target of the percentage of birds overweight. So that's like that's something like you can work towards. So I think that's really, I really appreciate that response. So Jeff, from your point of
Sure.
view.
So my comments on that are, I agree with Jorge. Like, to be over the body weight curve is the target that I would always aim for as well. How you get to that target body weight, that's the key here. And on everyday feeding, the data showed you could get to over the body or the target body weight with less feed. Now, in the last 2 years, as we're changing our feed program, and I think the birds have changed a little bit too, we are feeding more feed closer to the curve, but we're also trying to get first egg to come 14 days earlier, and also less smalls, more usable eggs. But I do agree with Jorge that the goal is always to reach the target body weight and to exceed it by a few percent.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, you said, you made a comment, and I've been in your barn. I've seen you feed your birds in the past. You talked about how it takes you half an hour to feed the birds. So just explicitly, that means you're in there every day actually feeding your birds. It's not automated. Is that right?
We choose not to be automated. That's correct. It's too important of a time. Breeders is about management. When Jorge spoke to, I envy very much the sorting capabilities that they have, putting only 1,500 birds in a pen. And I'm like, wow, how do we do that here in Canada? But I understand where the benefits come. But for me, a simple benefit of being in my barn while those birds are feeding and knowing exactly what's going on, knowing exactly how long it takes every bird to get feed, it's well worth the time.
Awesome. Thank you. I know you went into this a bit, Jorge, but we did have a question that was like, what is meant with cone feeding? And you did cover it a bit, but do you want to just quickly kind of reiterate what is meant by cone feeding?
Yes, that is a good point. If we follow our manual handbook, Aviagen manual handbook, they say do the gradings and the birds are going to recover by themselves. I mean, because we are reducing the competition between large and small birds. That sounds wonderful in the manual handbook, but we prefer to ensure that we are going to recover the body weight gains, especially of the light population. So we take the decision to offer more feed to those birds to have longer feed cleanup times for those populations of birds in order to recover weekly body weight gains and skeleton frames since 5th week of age. That is very important for us. And we know we have all studies from some customers that they have proved that if we have 3 populations in production, we follow like 22 flocks, and they've found that the light populations, they are always between 6 to 8 weights below the average of the flock. So we try to recover the birds. The cone feeding program is to open the feeding programs for each population to increase the feed for the light birds as soon as we finish the grading, and try to bring them down in the next 4 weeks to the same amount of feed at 5, 9, or 10 weeks. That is a very key point. We have been working for many years in our areas, and that is helping us to reduce the light population at the point of lay.
Very interesting. So I, as an extension person, I'm always thinking about the practical side. One of the reasons why we don't necessarily sort birds in Canada is the oh, I lost my words. It's labor intensive, and labor is likely more expensive here in Canada or North America in general than it is in Central and Southern America. So from a time point of view, I'm just wondering practically how much time is spent to achieve the sorting of the birds? Like, do you?
Yes,
Yeah.
that is a wonderful question, Brenda. Thank you. From a Latin American perspective, we sold the idea to our GP program in the US. So our colleagues in the US, they are following the grading. Doing a grading, it will take more or less for 10,000 females, it could take with 7 people 1 day. Okay, 1 day. And after that, you have the different populations and you keep them separate and you just follow the feeding programs. It takes, when we were checking the numbers, maybe 6 years ago, it was like one hatching egg. That would be the cost of doing a grading at that time, you know? So it's very very efficient. I mean, there is a great benefit of doing the grading, and after you have the grading, you have the different populations, because you have in a big barn, you just divide the barn in 6 groups. It's very easy, following the feeding lines and the drinking lines, and that is the cost. And it's very effective. It's very effective.
It sounds really good. How? So just so that I'm clear, those populations remain separate throughout the entire production cycle. They're never.
What we usually do is that we mix the heavy females with the average females and the average females with the light females when we are going to move them from the breeding farm to the production farm. But when they are going to be moved at 22 weeks, for example, we have targets very clear. You know, for example, at 20 weeks, we say the light females, they should be on target of the guide. The average females, they should be 3 to 4% above the target. That means 100 grams above the target. And the heavy population, they could be 150, 170 grams above the target. That means 6 to 7% above the target. And that's the way how we move the birds from the breeding farm to the production farm.
Fascinating. I could ask these kind of questions all day. This is just fascinating to me. I really appreciated the statement that you made that the eggs are developed in the rearing period, just pointing towards how important, and I think Jeff would probably agree, the management. Like you've invested all that time in going in and manually feeding your birds every day. I mean, with your equipment, obviously you're not there with a bucket, but recognizing the importance of these birds need a lot of management. It's not easy. So Jeff, it looked like you might have had something to comment on the conversation we were having. I just want to, before we move on to another question, I just want to check in and make sure that.
No, my only comment was from my presentation, I'm not recommending to feed less to the birds. All the point I was trying to make is notice the data, how inefficient the birds are on skip a day. Still feed to target body weights, right? That's the key message. Yeah.
Thank you for clearing that. And my apologies if my comment made it seem otherwise. That was my mistake, certainly not yours. Anyway, yeah, thank you, Jeff. There's a couple of questions left. We're a few minutes past our time. I hope it's okay if we can just clear up these questions. They're both for Jeff. And one is, can you repeat your house dimensions? And they believe it was 70 by 190 feet, and saying that it's much different than the longer houses built in the US because of cash flow concerns. So if you could just. Sure.
And I have those 2 questions open in front of me, so I'll respond to both of them.
Awesome.
So yes, our laying houses are, mine is 70 by 190 feet. Pretty normal in Canada, I guess, would be about 45 by 220. That's kind of a normal laying house. So yes, the cost of building a facility versus the money you will recoup on that facility for the next 20 years, I guess is a calculation you have to make. You know, if you want to make very long barns with trough and chain feeders because you save money at the front end, you know, you have to consider where you make your money and how much that'll cost you in the long run. So the second question from Erica, you have observed a reduction in behavioral issues, for example, male to female aggression. So yes, part of that I think is the calmness of the females and the receptiveness of the females. And because of that, we have an ability, normal numbers for us will start after transfer, we'll start a flock off as low as 6 males per 100. I've gone to 5. I've started at 4.5 for a test before, and we'll build that up to about 8.5 maximum. You know, after 35 weeks. But just the overall stress reduction leads to better behavioral issues, and the females being more receptive to the males, good feather coverage, all that kind of stuff comes into it.
Cool, thank you, Jeff.
Brenda, excuse me, can I make a question to Jeff?
Of course, that's why we're here, absolutely.
Yes, I'm sorry. How many feeding lines do you have in your house in the breeding period? How many feeding lines?
Sorry, in the rearing or the laying?
In rearing.
9 in the rearing.
9 feeding lines?
Yes.
And they are straight lines. They finish at the end, right?
Correct.
They don't have loops.
Nope.
Okay. For me, how many drinker lines do you have?
5.
Okay. If I will be, you know, I'm just thinking about Canada, I will think I will have at least 5 populations, you know? If you have 5 drinker lines, you can divide the flock according to the floor space in 5 populations. That will be, I will see, that's what we do.
Oh, and that was very interesting that to show what you guys did, how you divided up your population. I know my head is turning in all directions now.
I'm seeing a potential if Jorge's able to come to the in-person summit. Jeff's farm is not that far from Canmore. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just putting that out there. Might be an interesting possibility. It looks like we don't have any more questions. I will throw it back to both Jeff and Jorge. If there's any final thoughts that you want to make sure you get out there, I don't want to cut anybody off. So we'll start with Jeff. Any final thoughts?
Sure. So I want people not to be scared of everyday feeding. Skip-a-day feeding has challenges too. We do need to push in our industry as breeders for more equipment that's specialized to breeders so that we can have fast distribution of feed. That is so essential, fast distribution of feed. If we have 200 or 300 foot pan lines, that takes a long time. You know, the shorter lines, quick distribution, it has lots of benefits. You know, the other thing we need to consider, especially in North America, is we need to consider everyday feeding before we are forced to do it by animal welfare, by society. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Jorge?
That is a great point from Jeff. Yes, all we have to move to everyday feeding. And I think the nutrition is helping a lot. They are doing different new nutrition objectives in order to provide feeds with lower energy, lower protein, in order to provide a more longer feed cleanup times. That is a good point. I agree. And I think what I think too is that we still have many opportunities. The bears are going to be more efficient every year. But that means that from a reproductive standpoint, we need to try different approach in order to obtain a very high amount of eggs and chicks. This is a business at the end, but of course, we have to provide a very good amount of chicks for the business. That's it.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. And also to Rick, who provided his presentation at the top. So if there are any questions that you have and you didn't, or they come, if you're like me, I usually think of questions, you know, 2 hours after my opportunity to ask a question. If that's true, please feel free to head over to Peerboard and share your questions there, share your thoughts. We will be releasing the recording of this webinar tomorrow or later today. Thank you both to Jeff and Jorge for being here today. With that, I think that wraps up our webinar for today. We will see you same time next week for next week's webinar. So thank you, everyone, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Thank you, Brenda. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
Bye.